The community music center sat in the middle of a quiet town. It was not a famous place, but people loved it. Children came there after school to learn music. Teenagers practiced for competitions. Adults attended concerts on weekends. The old building was always filled with the sound of instruments. That Saturday morning was especially busy. A special piano recital was scheduled for the evening, and everyone was preparing for it. Teachers moved quickly through the hallways, checking schedules and helping students rehearse. Parents carried flowers and cameras. Students nervously practiced their pieces again and again. The event had been planned for months, and everyone wanted it to be perfect. Near the entrance, a woman quietly stepped inside. She wore simple clothes and carried a small handbag. There was nothing about her appearance that attracted attention. She moved calmly through the crowd, smiling politely whenever someone greeted her. Most people assumed she was a parent or a visitor. The woman's name was Clara. She had come to support a young neighbor who was performing that evening. The girl's family had invited her several times, and after some hesitation, she had finally agreed to attend. Clara found a seat near the back of the practice hall while students continued rehearsing. She enjoyed listening to music. In fact, music had always been a special part of her life, but very few people knew that. As she sat quietly, she watched students take turns playing short sections of their pieces. Some performed confidently. Others made mistakes and started over. The teachers encouraged everyone. Relax your shoulders. Take your time. Feel the rhythm. The room was full of nervous energy. Clara smiled as she listened. One student struggled through a difficult section and sighed loudly. "It's impossible," he said. The teacher laughed. "It only feels impossible because you're nervous." The student shook his head. "No, it's really impossible." Several people laughed. Clara quietly looked down to hide her smile. The teacher noticed. "You think it's funny?" he asked playfully. Clara quickly waved her hand. "No, not at all." The teacher smiled. "Then you understand how difficult it is." "A little," she replied. The conversation ended there, at least for the moment. A few hours later, trouble arrived. One of the main performers suddenly became sick. The young pianist had spent months preparing one of the most difficult pieces in the program. His performance was one of the highlights of the evening. Now he could barely stand. His parents looked worried. The teachers gathered together. "What do we do? We can't leave an empty spot in the program. The audience will notice." Everyone tried to find a solution. Some suggested rearranging the schedule. Others recommended shortening the concert. But nothing seemed ideal. Meanwhile, Clara remained seated quietly in the corner. She did not involve herself in the discussion. She simply watched. A teacher walked across the room holding the recital program. "We need someone to fill 15 minutes. "Who?" another teacher asked. No one had an answer. The students were already assigned to their own performances. Adding another piece at the last minute seemed impossible. The teachers continued discussing possibilities. As the afternoon went on, the atmosphere became more stressful. Then something unexpected happened. One of the younger students approached Clara. "Are you enjoying the rehearsals?" "Very much," Clara answered. "I wish I could play like that." Clara smiled. "They've worked very hard." The student nodded. "Can you play piano?" The question surprised her. "A little," she replied. The student immediately became excited. "You play?" Clara laughed softly. "Not much anymore." The student ran toward the nearby teachers. Before Clara realized what was happening, several teachers were looking in her direction. One of them approached. "I heard you play piano." Clara immediately shook her head. "Not really. A little is still something." She smiled politely. "I only enjoy listening these days." The teacher looked toward the piano. "Maybe you could help us." Clara already knew where the conversation was going. "Oh no," the teacher laughed. "Just hear me out." She listened patiently. The teacher explained the situation with the missing performer. "We need someone to fill part of the program." Clara could not believe what she was hearing. "You don't want me." "Why not?" "Because I'm not a performer." The teacher smiled. You said you play. A little. A little is enough. Clara laughed nervously. No, it isn't. Several nearby students began listening to the conversation. Soon more people joined. The crowd around them slowly grew. One teacher jokingly pointed toward the piano. Let's hear what you've got. The students laughed. Clara felt uncomfortable. She had come to watch, not perform. No, thank you. The teacher continued smiling. Just one song. I couldn't. Why not? It's been years. The teacher folded his arms. Then this is the perfect opportunity. The students started encouraging her. Do it. Just one song. It'll be fun. Clara felt herself becoming the center of attention. She hated being the center of attention. She preferred quiet places and quiet moments. The louder the room became, the more she wished she could disappear. One teacher tried a different approach. We aren't asking for a concert. Exactly, Clara replied. So there's no pressure. She laughed. That sounds like pressure. The students laughed with her. For a moment, the tension disappeared. Still, the teachers were not giving up. The recital problem remained unsolved, and now they believed they had found a possible answer, even if they knew almost nothing about her. One teacher sat beside Clara. Look, we're not expecting perfection. I know. Then what's the problem? Clara looked around the room. Dozens of eyes were watching her. That alone was enough reason. But there were deeper reasons too. Reasons she rarely discussed. Music had once been the center of her life. There had been a time when she spent entire days practicing. There had been a time when stages felt familiar. There had been a time when audiences did not frighten her. But those days belonged to the past. A very distant past. Life had changed. She had changed. The thought of sitting at a piano in front of strangers felt strange now. Very strange. I think someone else would be better, she said. The teacher sighed. We've already asked everyone. Then shorten the program. We'd rather not. Another teacher joined the conversation. How about a compromise? Clara looked up. What kind of compromise? You sit at the piano. She immediately shook her head. No. You play for 1 minute. No. If you don't like it, you stop. The students laughed again. The teachers were clearly enjoying themselves. Clara could not help smiling. Their persistence was almost impressive. The room waited for her answer. She looked at the piano. The black instrument stood quietly in the center of the room. It seemed harmless enough. Yet seeing it brought back memories she had not visited in years. Long practice sessions. Late nights. Competitions. Applause. Success. Loss. All of it returned in a flash. For a brief moment, she stared silently. Then she looked away. The students noticed. One of them spoke softly. Please. Another joined in. It would help. Then another. And another. Soon the room was filled with hopeful faces. Nobody was demanding anything now. They were simply asking. Clara took a slow breath. She could feel her resistance weakening. Not because she wanted attention. Not because she wanted recognition. But because she saw how much the recital meant to them. The students had worked hard. The teachers had worked hard. Everyone wanted the evening to succeed. One teacher smiled. So, the room became quiet. Clara looked at the piano one more time. Then she surprised everyone, including herself. Maybe one song. The students immediately cheered. The teachers exchanged relieved smiles. Clara laughed and covered her face. I haven't even played yet. We know, a teacher said. But this is already progress. The excitement in the room grew instantly. Nobody realized what was about to happen. Nobody knew the woman standing before them had once spent years mastering some of the most difficult piano music ever written. Nobody knew she had walked away from a promising musical career long ago. To them, she was simply a modest visitor who knew a few notes. Nothing more. As Clara slowly stood and looked toward the piano, the room watched with curiosity. The teachers expected a simple performance. The students expected a pleasant surprise. No one expected anything extraordinary. And that was exactly why what came next would leave them speechless. The room remained filled with excitement after Clara agreed to sit at the piano. Students whispered to one another. Teachers exchanged satisfied smiles. Even the parents who were nearby became curious. Nobody expected anything extraordinary. Most assumed they would hear a simple song played by a kind visitor trying to help save the recital. Clara, however, felt something very different. As she slowly walked toward the piano, every step seemed heavier than the last. The sounds around her began to fade. The conversations, the laughter, the applause, all of it seemed distant. Her attention was fixed on the piano waiting in the center of the room. For years she had avoided moments like this. Not because she disliked music. Quite the opposite. Music had once been the most important part of her life. The closer she came to the piano, the stronger the memories became. She remembered being a little girl sitting in front of an old upright piano in her grandparents' home. She had been fascinated by the instrument from the very beginning. While other children spent their afternoons playing outside, she often spent hours pressing piano keys and trying to copy melodies she heard on the radio. At first, her family thought it was only a phase. But the phase never ended. Her interest grew stronger every year. By the time she was 8 years old, she was taking formal lessons. Her teacher quickly noticed something unusual. Most children learned songs one note at a time. Clara seemed to understand music naturally. She could hear a melody once and often play parts of it from memory. Her fingers moved across the keys with surprising confidence. Her teacher often spoke about her potential. But Clara never paid much attention to praise. She simply loved playing. Every day after school, she practiced. Sometimes for 1 hour, sometimes for 3, sometimes even longer. The piano became her closest companion. Years passed. Her skills continued growing. Soon she began participating in local competitions, then regional competitions, then national events. Each challenge introduced her to stronger musicians. Instead of feeling discouraged, she became even more motivated. She practiced harder. She studied famous composers. She learned difficult pieces that many adults struggled to play. The work was demanding. There were times when her hands hurt. There were times when she felt frustrated. But she never quit. She loved the process too much. One memory stood out clearly. She had been 14 years old when she performed in a large concert hall for the first time. The audience had filled nearly every seat. The stage lights felt bright. The hall felt enormous. She remembered being nervous before walking on stage. But the moment she touched the piano keys, the fear disappeared. The music carried her forward. When she finished, the audience stood and applauded. It was one of the happiest moments of her young life. Many people believed she would become a professional pianist. Some even predicted international success. Opportunities continued appearing. Scholarships, invitations, advanced training programs. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. Then life changed. Very quickly. A serious family crisis appeared without warning. Someone she loved became ill. The situation required constant care and support. Suddenly, piano competitions no longer felt important. Concerts no longer mattered. Travel plans disappeared. Dreams were placed aside. Without hesitation, Clara focused on her family. Months turned into years. The responsibilities grew heavier. The piano remained in her life, but only in small moments. Whenever she found free time, she played quietly for herself. No audience, no judges, no expectations, just music. As the years passed, fewer people remembered her accomplishments. New musicians emerged. New competitions came and went. The world continued moving forward, and Clara quietly stepped away from the spotlight. Eventually, even she stopped thinking about her past achievements. The memories remained, but they felt like another lifetime. Back in the present, Clara reached the piano bench. The room waited. One of the teachers smiled. "Still time to change your mind." Several students laughed. Clara smiled back. "I've come this far." "That's true." The teacher stepped aside. Everyone expected her to sit down immediately. Instead, she stood quietly beside the piano. Her fingers lightly touched the polished surface. A strange feeling washed over her. It felt like meeting an old friend after many years apart. The piano looked different from the instruments she had once practiced on. But at the same time it felt familiar, comforting, safe. One student whispered to another, "Why is she taking so long?" The other shrugged. "Maybe she's nervous." The truth was more complicated. Clara wasn't simply nervous. She was remembering who she used to be, remembering a version of herself she had not visited in a long time. One teacher approached carefully. "Everything okay?" Clara nodded. "Yes. You don't have to play anything difficult." "I know. Just enjoy it." Those words stayed with her. Just enjoy it. For years, music had been connected to goals, responsibilities, and sacrifices. Perhaps it was time to simply enjoy it again. She slowly sat on the piano bench. The room instantly became quieter. Students stopped talking. Parents turned their attention toward the stage area. Even teachers who had been organizing papers paused to watch. Clara adjusted the bench slightly. A simple habit she had developed many years earlier. Without realizing it, she checked the distance between herself and the keyboard. Another old habit. Then she placed her hands gently in her lap. A young student sitting in the front row smiled nervously. "Good luck." Clara smiled back. "Thank you." The student had no idea why several teachers suddenly exchanged confused glances. Experienced musicians often notice small details. The way a person sits, the way they prepare, the way they position their hands. These little things reveal years of training. And Clara's movements looked surprisingly polished. One teacher quietly frowned. Something felt unusual. He couldn't explain why, but he decided not to say anything. The room remained silent. Clara finally raised her hands toward the keyboard. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes. Another memory appeared. Her first teacher. The woman who had believed in her from the beginning. The countless lessons. The encouragement, the patience, the advice. One particular sentence came back clearly. "Never play to impress people. Play to tell a story." Clara opened her eyes. A soft smile appeared on her face. Perhaps that was exactly what she needed to do. Not impress anyone. Not prove anything. Simply tell a story. The teachers still expected a basic performance. Maybe a simple melody. Maybe a beginner-level piece. Nothing more. They had no reason to expect otherwise. After all, the modest woman standing before them had never mentioned her past. She had never spoken about competitions. She had never discussed years of training. She had never told anyone about concert halls filled with audiences. To everyone in that room, she was simply a kind visitor helping during an unexpected problem. And Clara preferred it that way. She never liked talking about her achievements. She believed actions spoke louder than words. Still, a small part of her wondered what would happen next. Could she still play the way she once did? Would her fingers remember? Would the music return? Years had passed. Life had changed. People changed. But some things never truly disappeared. The room waited patiently. The silence grew deeper. A few students leaned forward in their seats. One teacher glanced at his watch. Another folded his arms and smiled. Everyone expected the first notes to arrive at any second. Clara took one final breath. Her hands settled naturally above the keyboard. The familiar feeling returned instantly. It was like reconnecting with a forgotten part of herself. For the first time that day, she felt completely calm. The nervousness disappeared. The doubts faded. Only the music remained. And as her fingers prepared to touch the keys, nobody in the room realized that the next few minutes were about to change everything they believed about the quiet woman they had almost overlooked. The room was completely silent. Dozens of people watched Clara sitting at the piano. Students leaned forward in their chairs. Teachers stood near the walls with their arms crossed. Parents paused their conversations. Everyone was waiting for the first note. Most expected something simple, maybe a short melody, maybe a familiar tune. Nobody expected much more than that. Clara slowly lowered her hands onto the keyboard. For a brief moment, She remained still. Then she pressed the first key. A single note filled the room. Clear, steady, confident. It was only one note, but something about it immediately caught people's attention. A few teachers exchanged quick glances. The sound was different. Not louder, not dramatic, just controlled. Very controlled. Clara played a second note. Then another. The melody began softly. Her fingers moved calmly across the keyboard. The music flowed naturally, as if she had played it only yesterday. The students listened quietly. One teacher tilted his head slightly. Something felt unusual. He couldn't explain it yet. But the woman sitting at the piano did not look like someone struggling to remember old lessons. She looked comfortable. Very comfortable. The melody continued. Each note connected perfectly to the next. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no searching for the right keys. Everything felt smooth, effortless. One student whispered to a friend, "She's actually pretty good." The friend nodded. "Better than I expected." A nearby teacher overheard them and smiled. He was thinking the same thing. Meanwhile, Clara felt herself relaxing. The familiar sensation of playing returned quickly. The keyboard no longer felt foreign. The room no longer felt intimidating. For the first time in years, she stopped thinking and simply played. The music carried her forward. The memories returned with every measure. Long practice sessions, early morning lessons, hours spent repeating difficult passages until they became perfect. The discipline she had developed years ago was still there. Hidden perhaps, but not gone. As the piece continued, the atmosphere in the room slowly changed. At first, people had watched out of curiosity. Now they were listening with genuine interest. The difference was impossible to ignore. A teacher quietly stepped closer. Then another. Soon several teachers were standing near the piano. Not because they needed to, because they wanted to hear better. The simple melody reached its ending. A few students prepared to clap. They assumed she had finished. Instead, Clara gently transitioned into another piece. This one was more challenging. The tempo increased. The notes moved faster. The rhythm became more complex. Several teachers immediately noticed. Their expressions changed. One teacher blinked twice. Another lowered the papers he had been holding. The room grew even quieter. Students who had been shifting in their seats suddenly stopped moving. Something unexpected was happening. The modest woman they had persuaded to play was not performing like a casual hobbyist. She was performing like someone with serious training. The music filled every corner of the hall. The difficult passages seemed effortless in her hands. Her fingers moved with precision. Years of experience revealed themselves through every phrase. One teacher found himself staring. He had taught piano for nearly 20 years. He knew talent when he saw it. And what he was hearing did not make sense. Not based on what they knew about Clara. He quietly walked toward another teacher. "Did you know she could play like this?" The other teacher shook his head. "No, not even close." Neither of them spoke again. They simply listened. Clara remained focused on the music. The audience no longer existed. The walls disappeared. The room disappeared. There was only the piano. Only the story she was telling through the keys. The emotions hidden inside the music felt real. Every note carried feeling. Joy, hope, reflection, strength. The audience could feel it. Even those with no musical training noticed. One parent wiped away a small tear. She wasn't sure why. The music simply touched something inside her. Nearby, a young student stared in amazement. He had never seen anyone play like that in person. The movements looked effortless, almost magical. But Clara knew the truth. There was no magic. Only years of work. Years of practice. Years of dedication. Those years were speaking now. One note at a time. As the piece continued, the technical difficulty increased. Fast runs appeared. Complex patterns emerged. Unexpected changes in dynamics filled the room. Yet Clara remained completely calm. Her hands moved naturally. The difficult sections seemed almost easy. One student quietly whispered, "How is she doing that?" Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. At least not yet. The teachers were now watching with complete attention. The recital problem had disappeared from their minds. They were no longer thinking about filling an empty program slot. They were trying to understand the person sitting in front of them. Who was she? Where had she learned to play? Why had nobody mentioned this before? Questions filled their minds. But no one interrupted. The music deserved their attention. Near the back of the room, the academy director had arrived. He had been dealing with last-minute event preparations elsewhere in the building. One of the teachers quickly motioned for him to come closer. The director looked confused. Then he heard the music. His expression immediately changed. He walked toward the piano. For several moments, he simply listened. Finally, he spoke quietly. "Who is playing?" The teacher beside him answered without taking his eyes off Clara. "That's what we're trying to figure out." The director frowned. "What do you mean?" "We thought she was just a visitor." The director looked surprised. "A visitor?" "Yes." The director listened again. The performance told a very different story. This was not the playing of an amateur. Not even close. Every detail reflected experience. Training. Discipline. Confidence. The director folded his arms and remained silent. Meanwhile, Clara reached one of the most difficult sections of the piece. Several students recognized it immediately. Many had attempted to learn parts of it during lessons. Few succeeded. The passage required speed, accuracy, and control. One mistake could disrupt the entire flow. The students watched closely. Some expected her to slow down. Others expected a mistake. Instead, Clara moved through the section flawlessly. The notes flowed like water. Smooth, natural, effortless. A few students actually gasped. The reaction was impossible to hide. One teacher quietly laughed. Not because anything was funny, because he couldn't believe what he was witnessing. "Unbelievable," he whispered. The teacher beside him nodded. "Absolutely unbelievable." The audience remained completely absorbed. No phones. No conversations. No distractions. Only music. Only Clara. Only the story unfolding through the piano. For years, she had hidden this part of herself. Not intentionally. Life had simply taken her in another direction. There had always been responsibilities. People who needed her. Things that mattered more than recognition. She never regretted those choices. Not once. But sitting at the piano again reminded her of something important. Music had always been part of her. No matter how much time passed. No matter how far life carried her. That connection remained. The piece slowly approached its ending. The final section arrived. Strong. Beautiful. Confident. The emotion in the room became almost tangible. Even the youngest students sensed it. The music felt bigger than a performance. Felt personal. Authentic. Real. As the final notes approached, nobody wanted it to end. The audience seemed frozen in place. Completely focused. Completely present. Clara played the last phrase. The final chord echoed through the hall. Then silence returned. A deep silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For several seconds, the room remained still. The audience looked at Clara. The teachers looked at one another. The students sat with wide eyes. Everyone seemed to be processing what they had just heard. Then it happened. A single person began clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within moments, the entire room erupted into applause. The sound filled the hall. Students jumped to their feet. Parents smiled and cheered. Teachers applauded harder than anyone. Some people couldn't stop smiling. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief. The standing ovation continued. Clara looked surprised. She had only intended to help. Nothing more. Yet the reaction before her felt overwhelming. One teacher laughed and said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I think we've all been keeping the wrong secrets today." The crowd laughed. But beneath the laughter was genuine amazement. Because one thing had become very clear. The quiet woman they had nearly overlooked was not an ordinary visitor. And as the applause continued, the teachers knew they needed answers. Who exactly was Clara? And how had someone with this level of talent remained hidden for so many years? Those questions would soon lead to a discovery that would leave the entire academy stunned. The applause continued far longer than anyone expected. Students remained on their feet. Parents smiled at one another. Teachers looked genuinely amazed. The atmosphere inside the music center had completely changed. Only an hour earlier, everyone had been worried about a missing performer and a recital problem. Now nobody was thinking about that anymore. All attention was focused on Clara. She sat quietly at the piano bench while the applause slowly faded. A slight smile rested on her face. She appreciated the kindness, but she also looked a little uncomfortable with so much attention. That had always been her nature. Even during her younger years, she never enjoyed being the center of attention. The academy director walked toward her first. The room became quiet again. People sensed that important questions were about to be asked. The director stopped beside the piano. That was remarkable. Clara smiled politely. Thank you. I hope you don't mind me asking something. She nodded. Of course. The director glanced toward the teachers before looking back at her. Where did you learn to play like that? The question hung in the air. Several students immediately leaned forward. The teachers waited patiently. Everyone wanted to hear the answer. Clara hesitated. For a moment, she looked down at the piano keys. Then she softly laughed. That's a long story. One student quickly replied, We have time. The room filled with gentle laughter. Even Clara laughed. The tension eased. The director pulled up a nearby chair. Then tell us what you're comfortable sharing. For several seconds, Clara remained quiet. She was deciding how much to say. The truth was simple. She had spent years avoiding conversations about her past. Not because she was ashamed. Not because she was hiding anything. She simply believed those years were behind her. But looking around the room, she saw genuine curiosity. No judgment. No pressure. Just honest interest. Finally, she nodded. I started learning when I was very young. Several students listened closely. How young? One asked. About 6 years old. A few students exchanged impressed looks. Clara continued. I fell in love with the piano almost immediately. She spoke calmly, without pride or exaggeration. Just simple facts. The students listened carefully. Teachers listened even more carefully. They were beginning to realize there was much more to her story. Clara explained how she spent years studying music, how she practiced every day, how her teachers encouraged her to continue improving. She described local competitions, regional performances, advanced training opportunities. The room grew quieter with every sentence. People had expected a few lessons, maybe a community music background. What they were hearing sounded far more serious. One teacher finally interrupted. You competed? Clara nodded. For several years. The teacher looked surprised. What kind of competitions? She named a few. The room fell silent. Several teachers immediately recognized the events she mentioned. Those competitions were not casual student activities. They were highly respected, extremely difficult. Many talented musicians spent years trying to qualify for them. The director slowly blinked. You reached those levels? Again, Clara nodded. The surprise in the room deepened. A teacher sitting near the back quietly stood up. Unlike the others, he had remained mostly silent throughout the afternoon. He was one of the oldest instructors at the academy. He had worked in music education for decades. As Clara continued speaking, something about her story felt strangely familiar. The names, the competitions, the timeline. A memory was beginning to surface. The teacher stepped closer. May I ask something? Clara turned toward him. Of course. The teacher studied her face for a moment. Then he spoke carefully. Years ago, did you perform at the National Young Musicians Festival? Clara looked surprised. Yes. The room immediately became interested. The teacher continued. Were you one of the finalists? Clara smiled slightly. I was. The teacher stared at her. For a moment, he looked as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then his eyes widened. The memory suddenly became clear. I remember you. The room went silent. Every person turned toward him. The teacher looked stunned. I actually remember you. Clara seemed surprised herself. That was a long time ago. It was. The teacher laughed softly. But I remember. The students looked confused. One finally asked, What are you talking about? The teacher shook his head in disbelief. Then he looked around the room. You don't understand. Everyone waited. I attended that festival. The room remained silent. I wasn't a judge. I was helping with educational workshops. He pointed gently toward Clara. She was one of the most talked about young pianists there. A wave of surprise moved through the audience. Students looked at Clara. Parents looked at Clara. Teachers looked at Clara. The modest woman who had quietly entered the building earlier that day suddenly seemed like an entirely different person. One student nearly jumped from his chair. Wait. Seriously? The older teacher nodded. Very seriously. The student looked back at Clara. You never told anyone that. Clara laughed softly. No one asked. The room erupted with laughter. Even the teachers couldn't stop smiling. But beneath the humor was genuine astonishment. The pieces were finally coming together. The performance, the confidence, the technique, the years of training. Now it all made sense. The academy director shook his head. This is unbelievable. Clara smiled. I don't think it's that unbelievable. The director laughed. You walked into our building looking like an ordinary guest. I am an ordinary guest. The students immediately disagreed. No, you're not. The room laughed again. One teacher leaned forward. Why did you stop performing? The question changed the mood slightly. Not in a negative way, just more thoughtful. Clara became quiet. The room noticed. Nobody pushed her to answer. Eventually she spoke. Life changed. The simplicity of the answer carried weight. People listened carefully. She explained how family responsibilities had become her priority, how someone close to her needed support, how her plans slowly shifted. She never spoke dramatically, never complained, never acted as though she had sacrificed more than others. She simply explained what happened. When people you love need you, some decisions become easy. The room remained silent. Her words felt genuine. Several parents nodded. They understood exactly what she meant. One teacher quietly said, That couldn't have been easy. Clara smiled. Life rarely asks what's easy. The statement stayed with everyone. It was simple, yet powerful. A student sitting near the front raised a hand. The room laughed. Felt like a classroom again. Yes, Clara asked. The student smiled nervously. Do you regret it? The question surprised everyone. It was honest, direct, and perhaps the most important question of all. Clara thought carefully before answering. Then she shook her head. No. The student looked surprised. You don't. No. She looked around the room. I miss music sometimes. The students listened closely. I miss performing sometimes. The teachers listened too. But I don't regret helping the people I love. The room became very quiet. Her answer felt sincere. No bitterness. No sadness. Just honesty. The older teacher nodded slowly. That's probably why your music sounds the way it does. Clara looked curious. What do you mean? The teacher smiled. Experience. Several people looked confused. The teacher continued. Technique can be taught. The students listened carefully. Skill can be developed. The room remained silent. But life gives music depth. Nobody spoke. The teacher looked toward the piano. You didn't just play notes today. Then he looked back at Clara. You told a story. The room immediately understood. That was exactly what they had felt. The performance had been technically impressive. But that wasn't why it affected people. It affected them because it felt real, human, honest. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Students asked questions. Teachers shared memories. Parents listened with interest. The recital preparations continued in the background, but nobody seemed rushed anymore. The mood throughout the academy felt lighter. warmer, inspired. For many students, this had become one of the most memorable days they had ever experienced. Not because they met a talented pianist, but because they met someone who remained humble despite everything she had accomplished. Someone who had chosen people over recognition. Someone who never felt the need to advertise her achievements. As the afternoon slowly moved toward evening, the academy director finally stood. He looked around the room. Then he looked directly at Clara. "I think I speak for everyone when I say we're very glad you walked through our doors today." The students immediately agreed. The teachers nodded. The parents applauded. Clara looked touched by the response. She hadn't planned any of this. She had simply come to support a young neighbor. Yet somehow the day had become much bigger than that. And although the truth about her past had finally been revealed, nobody realized that her impact on the academy was only beginning. Because over the next few days, her story would inspire students in ways no one could have predicted. The days following Clara's unexpected performance felt different at the academy. Students talked about it constantly. Teachers mentioned it during lessons. Parents continued sharing stories about the afternoon with friends and family. Nobody could believe that a woman who had quietly walked into the building as a visitor had turned out to be such an accomplished pianist. But what impressed people most was not her talent. It was her attitude. She never acted superior. She never spoke about her achievements unless someone asked. And she never tried to make herself the center of attention. That humility stayed in people's minds. 3 days after the recital, the academy director made a phone call. He had been thinking about Clara ever since her performance. Finally, he decided to invite her back. At first, Clara hesitated. She appreciated the invitation, but she wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity at the academy. The director quickly reassured her. "We don't want publicity." "Then what do you want?" she asked. "We want inspiration." Clara laughed softly. "I don't know if I'm qualified for that." The director smiled. "After what happened here, I think you are." A few days later, Clara returned. This time, everyone recognized her immediately. Students greeted her the moment she entered the building. Teachers welcomed her warmly. Even some parents who happened to be visiting stopped to say hello. Clara smiled politely at everyone. She still found the attention a little overwhelming. The director led her into one of the larger classrooms. Nearly 30 students were waiting. The room instantly became quiet when she entered. Several students sat up straighter. Others looked excited. A few seemed nervous. Clara noticed the expressions and laughed gently. "Why does everyone look so serious?" The room laughed. The tension immediately disappeared. She took a seat at the front of the classroom. For a few moments, nobody spoke. Then one student finally raised a hand. "How many hours did you practice every day when you were young?" The question made everyone smile. Clara thought for a moment. "Some days 1 hour." The students nodded. "Some days 5. Several eyes widened. "And occasionally more." The room became noticeably quieter. 5 hours sounded impossible to many of them. One student immediately asked, "Didn't you get tired?" Clara laughed. "Of course I got tired." The students laughed too. She continued, "People sometimes think successful musicians enjoy every minute of practice." Several students nodded. "But that's not true." The room listened carefully. "There were many days I wanted to do something else." That surprised them. "You did?" "Absolutely." The students exchanged looks. It was comforting to hear. Many of them struggled with motivation. Knowing someone talented experienced the same challenges made her feel more relatable. Clara leaned forward slightly. "The difference isn't that talented people never get tired." The room remained silent. "The difference is that they continue anyway." Several students quietly absorbed the lesson. One teacher standing near the back smiled. It was a simple statement, but it carried real value. The conversation continued. Students asked about competitions, training, mistakes, performance anxiety. Clara answered every question honestly. She never tried to sound perfect. In fact, she spent more time discussing failures than successes. One student looked surprised. "You failed competitions?" Clara laughed. Many times. The room reacted with disbelief. The same woman who had amazed everyone at the recital had failed? That didn't seem possible. Clara nodded. More times than I can count. The students listened closely. When you're learning, mistakes are normal. She paused. Actually, mistakes are necessary. The room became quiet again. One student frowned. Necessary? Clara smiled. How else do you know what to improve? Several students nodded slowly. The idea made sense. Many of them feared mistakes. They treated every wrong note as a disaster. Clara was helping them see things differently. As the afternoon continued, she moved to the piano. The students immediately became excited. This time, however, she wasn't there to perform. She was there to teach. A young student volunteered first. The child nervously sat at the piano and began playing a short piece. A few mistakes appeared almost immediately. The student stopped and looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. Clara shook her head. For what? I messed up. Clara smiled. Good. The student looked confused. The room laughed softly. What do you mean good? Clara pointed toward the keyboard. Now we know what needs work. The student slowly smiled. The fear began disappearing. Together they worked through the difficult section. Clara didn't criticize. She didn't lecture. She simply guided. Within minutes, the student was playing more confidently. The improvement was obvious. The entire class noticed. Soon another student volunteered. Then another. Then another. Hour after hour, Clara patiently worked with them. Each student received the same kindness, the same encouragement, the same attention. Word about the workshop spread quickly throughout the academy. Teachers began stopping by the classroom. Parents peeked through the windows. Students from other groups quietly gathered outside the door. Everyone wanted to listen. What made Clara special wasn't just her knowledge. It was the way she made people feel. She never made anyone feel small. She never acted impatient. And she never forgot what it felt like to be a student. At one point, a teenager approached her after the workshop. The student looked nervous. Can I ask something? Of course. The student hesitated, then finally spoke. I've been thinking about quitting. The room nearby grew quiet. Several people overheard. Clara listened carefully. Why? The student looked down. I'm not improving fast enough. Clara smiled gently. I've heard that before. The teenager looked surprised. You have? Many times. The student waited. Then Clara pointed toward the piano. Do you know how many years it took me to become comfortable performing difficult music? The teenager shook their head. A long time. She smiled. Much longer than most people imagine. The student remained silent. Clara continued. We live in a world where people see results. The teenager listened carefully. But they rarely see the years behind those results. The words clearly connected. The student's shoulders relaxed. For the first time there was a small smile. Nearby teachers watched the conversation. Several later admitted they learned as much as the students did. By the end of the week, Clara had become an important part of the academy community. Not officially, not through contracts or announcements, simply through her presence. Students began practicing harder. Attendance improved. The energy throughout the building felt different. Even teachers noticed positive changes. One afternoon, the academy director gathered several instructors. I've never seen students this motivated. Everyone agreed. One teacher smiled. Neither have I. Another nodded. She's reminded them why they started learning music in the first place. That observation felt accurate. Clara wasn't motivating students through pressure. She wasn't promising fame or success. She wasn't talking about trophies or awards. She was reminding them to love the music itself. That message reached people. As the weeks passed, students continued improving. Confidence grew. Friendships strengthened. The academy felt more connected than ever. One evening, after another successful workshop, the director approached Clara. I've been thinking. Clara laughed. That sounds dangerous. The director laughed too. Probably. He paused. Would you consider something? What? The director smiled. A special concert. Clara immediately shook her head. No. The director laughed. I knew you'd say that. I haven't changed my mind. He continued smiling. Hear me out. Clara folded her arms. The director explained his idea. Community concert. Not focused on fame. Not focused on recognition. Focused on inspiration. Students would perform alongside teachers. And Clara would close the evening with a few pieces. The goal wasn't to celebrate talent. The goal was to celebrate perseverance, growth, learning, community. For the first time, Clara didn't reject the idea immediately. She listened. The more she listened, the more she understood the purpose behind it. It wasn't about her. It was about the students, the people she had come to care about. The director noticed her expression changing. He smiled. You're considering it. Clara sighed. Maybe. The director laughed. I'll take maybe. The following weeks would bring preparations unlike anything the Academy had experienced before. And although Clara didn't realize it yet, the special concert would become one of the most meaningful performances of her entire life. The weeks passed quickly. What had started as an ordinary visit to a community music academy had turned into something nobody could have predicted. Students practiced with more enthusiasm than ever. Teachers worked hard preparing for the special concert. Parents volunteered to help organize the event. The entire community seemed excited. And at the center of it all was Clara. She still found the attention unusual. Even after everything that had happened, she remained the same humble person she had always been. Whenever someone praised her, she quickly shifted the conversation toward the students. Whenever people spoke about her achievements, she reminded them how much effort everyone else was putting in. That attitude only made people respect her more. As the date of the concert approached, excitement continued growing. Tickets were gone within days. Additional chairs had to be added. People from neighboring towns even planned to attend after hearing about the event. The Academy director could hardly believe it. He had organized concerts for years. None had generated this much interest. Yet he understood why. People weren't coming simply to hear music. They were coming because they had connected with a story about talent, a story about humility, a story about someone who quietly carried extraordinary abilities without needing recognition. The evening of the concert finally arrived. The Academy looked beautiful. Fresh flowers decorated the entrance. Students wore their best clothes. Parents filled the hall with excited conversations. Teachers moved through the building making final preparations. Backstage, nervous energy filled the air. Students checked their music sheets. Some practiced difficult passages one final time. Others sat quietly, trying to calm their nerves. Clara walked through the room, offering encouragement. She stopped beside one young student whose hands were visibly shaking. Nervous? The student nodded. Very. Clara smiled. That's normal. The student looked unconvinced. It doesn't feel normal. Clara laughed softly. It never does. The student smiled. Were you nervous before performances? Every single time. The answer immediately surprised the student. Really? Every single time. The student seemed relieved. It helped to know that even experienced performers felt nervous. Before walking away, Clara added one final piece of advice. Don't focus on being perfect. The student listened carefully. Focus on sharing the music. The student nodded. Those words stayed in mind long after Clara moved on. Soon the concert began. The hall was completely full. Families, friends, students, teachers, and community members filled nearly every seat. The atmosphere felt warm and welcoming. The Academy director stepped onto the stage first. He thanked everyone for attending. He spoke briefly about the importance of music education. Then he shared a few words about perseverance and growth. Without mentioning Clara directly, he acknowledged the unexpected journey that had brought everyone together. The audience applauded. Then the performances began. One by one, students took the stage. Some played piano. Others performed with different instruments. A few sang. Each performer brought something unique. The audience responded with enthusiasm and encouragement. Several students who once struggled with confidence now performed beautifully. Teachers noticed the difference. Parents noticed it too. The growth was impossible to miss. Backstage, Clara watched proudly. Not because she had created their success, because she had witnessed their hard work. They had earned every moment themselves. As the evening continued, more performances followed. The audience remained engaged throughout. Every student received warm applause. Every performer left the stage smiling. The academy director couldn't stop smiling either. The concert was already a success. Yet everyone knew there was still one final performance waiting. As the evening neared its conclusion, anticipation filled the room. The audience sensed it. The students sensed it. The teachers sensed it. Finally, the director returned to the stage. The applause settled. The room became quiet. He smiled at the audience. Before we finish tonight, there is one person we would like to thank. People immediately knew who he meant. The director continued. Several weeks ago, a simple act of kindness changed this academy. The audience listened closely. A visitor agreed to help during an unexpected situation. Smiles appeared throughout the room. What happened afterward reminded all of us of something important. The hall remained silent. Greatness is not always loud. The audience nodded. Sometimes it arrives quietly. More nods followed. And sometimes the most inspiring people are the ones who never seek recognition. The audience immediately began applauding. The director smiled. Please welcome Clara. The applause grew louder, much louder. Students stood first, then parents, then teachers. Soon the entire audience was standing. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute before Clara even reached the stage. She looked genuinely overwhelmed. As she sat at the piano, she took a moment to absorb the scene before her. The crowded hall, the smiling faces, the students she had come to know, the teachers who had become friends. It all felt surreal. Several weeks earlier, she had entered the building as a complete stranger. Now she felt part of something meaningful. The applause finally faded. The room became silent. Clara looked at the piano. Then she looked at the audience. For a brief moment she spoke. Thank you. The hall remained quiet. She smiled. I came here to support one student. Gentle laughter filled the room. I never expected any of this. More smiles appeared. Clara looked toward the students. But I'm grateful it happened. The audience applauded again. Then she turned back to the piano. The hall became completely silent. Her hands settled on the keyboard. The first notes appeared softly. The music felt warm and welcoming. Not dramatic. Not flashy. Just beautiful. The audience listened carefully. Every note seemed to carry meaning. Students sat completely still. Teachers watched with admiration. Parents smiled quietly. As the performance continued, emotions filled the room. The music reflected gratitude, hope, reflection, joy. The audience felt every part of it. Many remembered the first unexpected performance that had introduced them to Clara's talent. Tonight felt different. This wasn't about surprise anymore. It wasn't about discovering a hidden virtuoso. It was about celebrating a person who had touched countless lives through kindness and wisdom. The music continued flowing through the hall. Time seemed to slow down. Nobody checked phones. Nobody whispered. Nobody looked away. Every person remained fully present. When the final section arrived, the emotion in the room became almost tangible. Students who had once doubted themselves now sat taller. Teachers felt proud. Parents felt grateful. The performance represented more than music. It represented growth, community, connection. The final notes eventually arrived. Clara played the last chord. The sound lingered for a moment. Then silence filled the hall. A deep silence. The kind that only happens when people are truly moved. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then applause erupted. The audience rose to its feet once again. The standing ovation seemed even louder than before. Students cheered. Parents applauded. Teachers smiled proudly. Some audience members even wiped away tears. The reaction continued for several minutes. Clara stood and bowed gently. She looked humbled by the response. The academy director eventually joined her on stage. Several teachers followed. One of them stepped forward. The same teacher who had jokingly encouraged her to play weeks earlier. The audience laughed as soon as they saw him. He smiled and shook his head. "I think I owe you an apology." The room laughed warmly. Clara laughed too. The teacher continued. "When we first met, I thought you were just a visitor who knew a little about music." More laughter followed. "I was very wrong." The audience applauded. The teacher smiled. "But I'm glad I was wrong." Everyone agreed. The teacher extended his hand. Clara shook it warmly. There were no hard feelings. Never had been. The moment perfectly reflected everything people had learned from her. Never judge too quickly. Never assume you know someone's story. Talent can be hidden. Experience can be hidden. Wisdom can be hidden. The most extraordinary people often appear ordinary at first glance. As the concert came to an end, people slowly began leaving the hall. Yet many stayed behind to talk. Students gathered around Clara. Parents thanked her. Teachers shared memories from the past few weeks. The atmosphere remained joyful long after the music ended. Years later, people would still talk about that concert. Not because it featured the most difficult piano pieces. Not because it attracted the biggest audience. But because it reminded everyone of something simple and powerful. True greatness does not need attention. It does not need recognition. It does not need applause. It simply reveals itself through actions. And the quiet woman who had once been forced to play a piano piece had shown an entire community exactly what that looked like. Long after the final note faded, the lesson remained. And that lesson became the most memorable part of all.